And good news, we've been able to fix sound with Paul Rogers, Emeritus Professor of Peace Studies at the University of Bradford. Paul, thank you very much. Thanks for your patience. We got it fixed. Okay, tell us your analysis of the last 48 hours and the attacks, large-scale attacks in Lebanon.
Well, look at it from the different perspectives. For the United States, it wants some sort of ceasefire. The United States is in the position to call this war a halt within days if it decided to do so. But for various reasons connected with internal US politics, it's not prepared to do that. So now, in that sense, it is trying to get some sort of easing of the current tensions and maybe a ceasefire. On the Hezbollah side, they've been expecting something like this at some stage. They were never sure. And what has happened, I think, has been quite a shock to them in the short term, but not in the longer term. As far as Israel is concerned, I think it's pretty clear that Netanyahu does not want a ceasefire of any form at the present time, certainly not before the next elections. Of course, we may well have Donald Trump in the White House then, which will put a very different complexion on things come January. And I think what we're seeing now is the Israelis trying to damage almost the psychology of Hezbollah by what they're doing. But the thing one has to remember is that Israel is highly unlikely to try to occupy southern Lebanon. I think it was Hamda early on from
Amman, yeah.
Amman was saying that essentially what they want is the occupation of southern Lebanon. But, you know, in 1982...
Well, that was the far right, Paul, just to jump in, that was the far right specifically, right? I asked her what the far right wants because over the last year we've seen Benjamin Netanyahu side with them several times.
No, you're quite right. The question was specifically to her about the far right. But there are elements within Israeli society which probably extend a bit beyond them, who would like to see some sort of occupation. But that is hugely difficult. When the Israelis occupied southern Lebanon between, 82 and 90, that was when Hezbollah was actually formed as an opposition party. And over those 8 years or so, the Israelis lost 500 of their troops to different sorts of raids. And essentially they got out. And in 2006, which was the last major war, the Israelis had huge problems in trying to do even short-term occupation to get launch sites, and they lost a lot of their key troops. So what one has to remember is whatever the Israelis are going to do, it is highly unlikely to involve any kind of ground incursion above a very short probing attack, which means in turn that just when the Tahrir Doctrine comes in, you actually have to try and punish the wider community. And I think
what
in some
doctrine?
ways...
I didn't hear you there. What doctrine?
Sorry, the Tahrir Doctrine, it basically is named after the district just south of central Beirut. And this is where you cannot win a war of counterinsurgency, if you like. Then you have to try and punish the population so that support for the insurgents actually diminishes. It's not solely true of Israel. Other countries have done it in different circumstances, notably the Russians at the time of the Grozny Wars. But essentially, this
Would
is
it
really...
be fair to say that doctrine has been at play in the Gaza Strip for the last year?
Absolutely. It's been very clear. And in many ways, if you look at what some of the Israeli strategic analysts are saying, they will certainly be open to this. But this, in fact, Cyril, takes us to the next point. In a sense, the war in Gaza is failing as far as the Israelis are concerned. They cannot actually get rid of Hamas. And any kind of agreement which allows Hamas any kind of presence in Gaza, even just to exist there, has to be unacceptable to them. So they are in a major bind. And it may well be that the fundamental reason why Netanyahu is going for this phase of a war in Lebanon is a gigantic diversion, at least until the American elections. I think a lot is being pinned on the results of those particular elections, which does mean a lot actually hinges on them as far as the Middle East is concerned.
Okay, when you say the reason Netanyahu is going for this phase of the war, what do you expect that to actually look like? Because you also said you don't expect to see a major ground invasion of Lebanon. So what do you think it's going to look like?
I think it'll be much more airstrikes. Basically, there may well be other disruptions. They may be capable of doing other disruptions. And certainly what has happened in the last 48 hours makes life a lot more difficult for Hezbollah, its leadership and its communications. But one suspects that Hezbollah, in a way, was always prepared for something like this, even if it could not be specific. And if it was, then what we'll be prepared to do is to give the individual groups, the individual platoons almost, certainly at low level on the Hezbollah side, freedom of action. And there will be some sort of pre-planning, which may not even require much in the way of communications. They're very conscious of their ability to do this. And one has to remember that this seems to be an extraordinary achievement for the Israelis. But almost a year ago, they were absolutely shocked when they lost control of Gaza. So one has to always look at it in the round, and it may well be that Hezbollah itself is going to be more resilient than we would expect. It could be wrong on that, but I think that's highly likely.
And Paul Rogers, Emeritus Professor of Peace Studies at the University of Bradford, we're thankful for your time this hour. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.